if you are following along in the Achrei Chumash, we are on page 679. We're beginning Parashat Achrei Mot. So these are all the past few weeks. They all sort of stand as one big section, as one big topic of conversation, and it's all structured around the dedication of the tabernacle. So we've been building this Mishkan, this tabernacle, the sort of portable temple where God is going to dwell, and that consumes a lot of the final sections of the book of Exodus. And then we have a dedication ceremony for the tabernacle and for the Kohanim, for the priests. And Aaron and his sons, they spend 7 days in dedication, and then on the 8th day they become the priests, and Aaron becomes the high priest. And then 2 of his sons die. Nadav and Avihu die. It's a little unclear, it's a little enigmatic why they die. The text says they brought strange fire, they did what was displeasing to God. We don't exactly understand. There are lots of theories, lots of ideas about why they died, and why God responded so sternly about the whole thing, saying to Aaron not to mourn, not to follow the rituals of mourning. Although then he does seem to follow a few of them. He castigates his sons about some technicalities for the offering. Moses gets involved, and it's all sort of confusing. And then we move into Tazria and Metzora, where we talk about ritual purity. First, there's some rules about keeping kosher, and then there's some rules about this sort of ritual purity. And kind of in the back of our minds during this whole thing, we know that this is an ongoing conversation occasioned by the dedication of the tabernacle, the dedication of the priests, and the death of 2 of them. 2 of them died because they didn't follow the rules correctly. And so God is here specifying in Tazria and Metzora, and in the second half of Shmini before that even, here are some of the rules that you need to follow. And then we get into some of the specifics, it would seem, of exactly what Nadav and Avihu did wrong. Or at least that's the implication of this text here. Once again, I'm on page 679. This is Parashat Achrei Mot, literally after the death. And we see that the Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the 2 sons of Aaron, who died when they drew too close to the presence of the Lord. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell your brother Aaron that he is not to come at will into the shrine behind the curtain, in front of the cover that is upon the ark, lest he die. For I appear in the cloud over the cover. Thus only shall Aaron enter the shrine, with the bull of the herd for a purification offering, and a ram for a burnt offering. He shall be dressed in a sacral linen tunic, with linen breeches next to his flesh, and be girt with a linen sash, and he shall wear a linen turban. They are the sacral vestments. He shall bathe his body in water and put them on. And from the Israelite community he shall take 2 he-goats for a purification offering, and a ram for a burnt offering." So there's a lot going on here. There's a lot to unpack. The fact that this section begins with the context, resuming the context of the death of Nadav and Avihu, who may well have been in the back of our minds during the previous Parshiot, but we might have sort of lost track. We might have sort of, forgotten where we are chronologically in all of this, or we might not have a fair understanding of the chronology of these texts. There are times when the Torah, according to our tradition, is given out of chronological order for the purpose of having a sort of thematic order, or of connecting in a deep metaphorical, spiritual sense, different sections that aren't chronologically connected, but they are connected spiritually. And so this may be a return to the chronology, to the story of the dedication of the tabernacle and the priests. So we are returning one way or another to the theme, and presumably here, what's going on is that God is specifying, here's what you need to do to stay alive. Here's what you need to do to stay healthy. Here's what you need to do not to do what Nadav and Abihu did, which you can see here in the English. They died when they drew too close to the presence of the Lord. So there is something in the tabernacle that is profoundly holy and dangerous. The presence of the Lord is just it's just too much for people. It's too much for human beings. And so then the question becomes, how do you handle the job, the task of being the community's representative, of being assigned the holy task of stepping into this space that seemingly most of the Israelites are smart enough to realize that they'd rather not take the chance. They'd rather not get involved directly face to face. That's the theme at Mount Sinai, where they say, please, Moses, can you go hear the rest of this? We don't want to hear the voice of God directly. And so this becomes sort of like a safety, like an instruction manual, safety instructions. This is how you're going to do this in a way that doesn't cause you to die. Any thoughts about this, or questions, concerns, comments? All right, well, we'll keep going. So we'll delve into some of the specifics here. So it says, tell your brother Aaron he's not to come at will into the shrine behind the curtain. So don't go into the innermost section of the tabernacle. So this is, it's not referred to here as the Holy of Holies, but we understand it to be the Kodesh Kodeshim, the Holy of Holies, the innermost section of the tabernacle, and later, of course, the temple in Jerusalem. And the Kohanim are not supposed to just go in there. They're not supposed to just wander in. There is a specific time, there is a specific person, and there is a specific ritual, and even specific clothing that you have to wear in order to keep yourself safe, in order to do this in the right way. This is probably the highest stake ritual in our tradition. I lead communities, individuals, and all sorts of Jewish rituals, and I try very hard to do them correctly. If I get the Seder out of order, nothing happens to, like, there's no thunder and lightning. It's comparatively low stakes, where you see here, if you don't do this correctly, you die. And there was a lot of concern in the first and second temple period that the high priest do this correctly. If we have time, we'll be able to get into some of those stories here. But we see, thus only shall Aaron enter the shrine. So first of all, just Aaron, none of the other Kohanim, only what we call the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. He's the only one who's allowed in. And he has to do these offerings first: a bull of the herd for purification, and a ram for a burnt offering. And he has to wear special sacred clothing: the linen tunic, linen breeches next to his flesh. There seems to be a lot of concern here for wearing pants or underwear, or wearing something to cover the priest's private parts. We saw this previously in the book of Exodus in the discussion of ascending the altar by stairs. We see this in the conversation about the priestly vestments, and now we see it once again here. We see a You have to wear a linen garment, and you have to wear a linen garment underneath. So the tunic is more like a shirt or a kaftan kind of thing. And then you have to wear pants or underwear underneath. And you have to have a belt on also and be girt with a linen sash. So there's a great amount of concern about keeping one's clothes on and making sure that you're doing this correctly. Sometimes people wonder, which of these did Nadav and Avihu do wrong? Which of these did they mess up? And some have speculated that, well, perhaps it is that they didn't wear the proper clothing. And there seems to be an implication here about sexual purity, about keeping one's private parts private, and that different cultures have different expectations for what that means. But there seems to be a lot of concern here for wearing proper clothing. All right, and from the Israel, so he shall bathe his body in water and put them on. So first he purifies in a mikveh and then puts on the clothing. And from the Israelite community, he shall take 2 he-goats for purification offering and a ram for a burnt offering. And so now we're going to see an instruction about how to do these sacrifices and in what order to do them. It's worth noting here that we still haven't seen a pretty basic piece of information, which is when. When does this happen, and how often does this happen? If you've read this a few times, if you are familiar with the commentaries, if you're familiar with the Talmud, then you'll know that this is on Yom Kippur. But we haven't gotten there yet. We haven't seen anything that says Yom Kippur or the 10th of Tishrei. I mean, there's nothing here yet, and there's nothing here that says this happens annually. We're gonna see. We're gonna get there, but we haven't gotten there yet. We seem to be more interested in some of the specifics. All right, so I'm on verse 6. Aaron is to offer his own bowl of purification offering, to make expiation for himself and for his household. Aaron shall take the 2 he-goats and let them stand before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and he shall place lots upon the 2 goats, one marked for the Lord and the other marked for Azazel. Aaron shall bring forward the goat designated by lot for the Lord, which he is to offer as a purification offering, while the goat designated by lot for Azazel shall be left standing alive before the Lord to make expiation with it and to send it off to the wilderness for Azazel. All right, so there's a lot going on here. There's a lot to unpack. So the first thing to note here is that it begins with Aaron offering his bull, but then it doesn't get into any details about that. It simply says Aaron is to offer his own bull of purification offering, to make expiation for himself and for his household. In the Hebrew, that last bit is v'chiper ba'ado u'ba'ad beito. So literally to atone for his sake and for his house's sake, which the rabbis understand to mean something very specific, which is that the Kohen Gadol has to be married. In order to qualify to be the high priest, you have to be from a priestly family. You have to be a man from a priestly family. There are a number of other qualifications in terms of, not having blemishes and having all your mental faculties and this sort of thing. And you have to be married. You have to have a wife. And they understand that is derived from the word beito, from the word house or household. And so there is a sort of a bizarre concern in the in the Talmud around this issue, where someone says, the high priest has to be married on Yom Kippur. Well, what happens if he wakes up on the morning of Yom Kippur and his wife is dead? And then there's no one to do the rituals of Yom Kippur. So maybe, this rabbi says, we should require high priests to have 2 wives. That way, we're assured that we won't have this hypothetical problem. And all of his colleagues say, that is really stupid. I mean, they don't use that term, but they say, that's not, like, we don't have to worry about completely improbable things. If that happened, first of all, there is a solution, which is that the high priest has an assistant high priest who could take over if need be. It's also just not something that happens very often. And the odds of it happening to that specific person on that specific day, it seems very improbable. As long as we're talking about improbable things, you could say, well, what if he wakes up and both of his wives are dead? So maybe we should make him have 3 wives. Or what if all 3 wives are dead? Maybe we should make him have 4 wives. And they say, and they conclude this bizarre line of argument with "Ein ledavar sof." If you start on this path, there's no end of it. There's no end to the bizarre hypotheticals. So we don't worry about that. We do not worry about it, but we do worry, we do concern ourselves that the high priest has to be married. He has to be a family man. He has to have a house. We don't have a celibate priesthood. We don't have an expectation in Judaism that to have a special, unique leadership role in our people, standing in front of God on behalf of the Jewish people, that you have to be sexually abstinent, you have to not have a wife and kids or a husband and kids. It's just not part of our understanding of things. We don't see that as a higher path. In fact, quite the opposite at times. Like in this moment, you see that marriage is required for leadership. There are other texts in our tradition, other places where we say, okay, so in order to do this, we want we don't trust the handing out of the tzedakah funds to single guys, because we need someone with roots in the community. We need someone with ties in the community that we can trust, and that is a way to establish trust, that you're not just going to run off with the charitable distribution. No, it's not a perfect solution, obviously. You could be married and just run off, but it is considered to be a way that sort of grounds the leadership among the people, to be married, to have a family, and so there's absolutely no expectation of celibacy, nor is it really encouraged or thought of as a higher path. Far from it, actually. All right, so Aaron takes the 2 goats and they mark the 2 goats and they draw lots. And one goat is, so neither of these goats are going to have a good time. Neither of these goats are going to be happy that they're here. One is marked for the Lord and one is marked for Azazel. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean? So if you look at the Hebrew, if you look at the word Azazel, it's Ayin, Zayin, Aleph, Zayin, Lamed. Many people suspect that the original spelling was Ayin, Zayin, Zayin, Aleph, Lamed. That this was a sort of pious correction so that you wouldn't look at the word Azazel and see El at the end, the name of God or a God, that you wouldn't think, oh, Azazel is sort of like the equivalent of God. I mean, it's being presented here is pretty evidently as you know, there are two sides. There's God and there's Azazel, and you know, you can look at the in the Hebrew. So Goral echad laDonai, v'goral echad la'Azazel. It seems very obvious. There's black and there's white. There's good and there's bad. There's God and there's Azazel. Now, this is going to be a problem for all sorts of reasons. One is that we don't fundamentally believe in something like this. Now, you could say, well, it's right here in the text, isn't it? But it's fairly unclear. And the temptation to read it in that way is going to be profound. The Jewish people are going to spend a lot of time among neighbors who see the world as divided between good and evil, and see the heavens divided between good and evil. This was the foundational understanding of the Zoroastrian religion, which was the dominant religion of Persia until the rise of Islam. It was the major faith of the Middle East, and all faiths and all practices and traditions are complicated, but to try to sum up Zoroastrianism, they believed that the world is a battlefield mimicking the battlefield of heaven, in which there is a good God fighting a bad God. And that's the world we have. That's the universe we have. The universe is in some sense a creation of that battle. And this goes a long way towards answering a lot of questions that people have about why bad things happen. Well, bad things happen because the bad God has some power in the world. And good things happen because the good God has some power in the world. And you have to decide which God you're fighting for, which cause you are fighting for. Now, it's you know, it's not my job to knock other religions or bash other people's points of view about things, but this has an impact on Judaism. It has an effect on Judaism. Probably we are moved in sort of knowledge of this to sort of, you know, nod in the direction of these ideas, and at the same time to clarify our own beliefs. You see that in what we call Deutero-Isaiah, the final chapters of the book of Isaiah, where for the first time, God specifies very clearly that God is the creator of good and of evil. And this is such a profound and troubling saying, in a sense, that we change it in our liturgy in the morning, where instead of saying Oseh Ra, the creator of evil, we say Oseh HaKol, creator of everything, which includes good and evil, presumably. But so this is, you know, like I say, it's an idea that, you know, it certainly helps make sense of the world. But the Jewish perspective has always been to say that we, in fact, we can't make sense of the universe if it were created in that way. How on earth could a functioning universe be the byproduct of a chaotic battle between good and evil? Only a creator who is the one source, the one will, the one intent. Only that creator could make the world that functions, and the world does largely seem to function. And so this is an idea that we come to reject, although you see certainly an influence of it in our understanding of the Yetzer HaTov and the Yetzer Hara, or our understanding of the Satan, the adversarial angel creature, who is, you know, in later Judaism, influenced quite a bit by Christianity, thought of as, in many ways, as the, you know, the fallen counterpart of the Archangel Michael, or something along these lines, or maybe even among common folks, an evil counterpart to God himself. Although I think most rabbis and priests would tell you that that's not actually accurate. But this is an obvious temptation to note in this text here. And so all of the commentators go way out of their way to try to explain Azazel is not, in fact, a god or a devil or a being or anything like that. Azazel is a location. It's the desert. It's the wilderness. It's way out in the Judean desert. Okay, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball to know what the original author meant by the term Azazel. It seems to me probably this is supposed to be a being of some sort, but the Jewish tradition has very clearly tried to establish that no, in fact, this is not a being. This is a location. All right, any thoughts about that? Questions, comments? It's a bit of a tangent, but that's okay. All right, well, we'll keep going here. So it says, Aaron shall bring forth the goat designated by lot for the Lord, which he is to offer as a purification offering. So to be the goat designated for God means that you are going to be sacrificed in the tabernacle or in the temple, while the goat designated by lot for Azazel shall be left standing alive before the Lord. It's alive for now, to make expiation and to send it off into the wilderness for Azazel. Aaron shall then offer his bull of purification offering to make expiation for himself and his household. He shall offer his bull of purification offering. He shall take a pan full of glowing coals, scooped from the altar before the Lord, 2 handfuls of finely ground aromatic incense, and bring this behind the curtain. He shall put the incense on the fire before the Lord, so that the cloud from the incense screens the cover that is over the Ark of the Pact, lest he die. So we are resuming once again our theme of just how high stakes this all is. And the question you can ask here is why? What is Aaron, or the high priest, specifically doing here that prevents his own death? And there's sort of two schools of thought about this. One is that he's punctiliously following the ritual, and just following the ritual in and of itself is the way that you stay alive. And then the other perspective is that the incense and the cloud generated by the incense keeps the high priest alive, because when God shows up in the Holy of Holies, the cloud keeps the high priest from dropping dead. Because if the high priest saw God directly, he would definitely fall over and die. But the incense cloud keeps him safe. Now, interestingly, this is not the understanding that makes it into the sort of Jewish majority thinking. A long time ago, when the Second Temple stood, there were lots of people who had lots of different points of view. There were lots of groups within Judaism. You might have heard these terms, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. These were 2 different groups of Jewish leadership. The Pharisees were the forerunners of the rabbis. And the Sadducees were more or less the temple leadership and the Kohanim. Now, you could be a Kohen and a Pharisee, but if you were a Sadducee, you were probably connected to the temple in Jerusalem, and they were the de facto leaders of the Jewish people while the temple stood. But the common folks tended to be Pharisees. And there's an interesting sort of a theme that runs throughout a lot of the Talmud texts around this, which is that the priestly families have their way of doing things, the Sadducee way of doing things, but they are terrified of the crowd. They're terrified of the common folks who would come to Jerusalem for these holidays. Some of them lived there, some of them came in on pilgrimage, and they were led by the Pharisees, and they would insist that the priests had to do it their way. and I mean, this would come to violence at times. There's a story in Josephus about the high priest who was nearly killed by Etrogim on Sukkot, when the people got so mad that he was doing the Sukkot rituals in the wrong way, or what they thought was the wrong way, they started throwing their etrogs at him. And so this was very serious business. And so the Sadducee way of lighting the incense was to do it inside in the Holy of Holies, to do it so that the cloud would be confined to the Holy of Holies, so that the presence of God would be clouded by the smoke. And the Pharisees read the text a little differently. They say, no, this lighting happens outside. You shall light it outside and bring some of it in, but it's not a smoky room. It doesn't completely cover the room. And then the story in the Talmud is that the Sadducees always did it the Pharisee way, except one year there was a guy who decided, I'm going to do it my way. And all the other priests said, oh, you probably shouldn't have done that. And then it wasn't long before he dropped dead. This is the way the story goes. So this is all very high stakes, but it's fairly unclear, I think, to a modern reader, what makes this so high stakes. Why is coming into the presence of God so enormously frightening? I think in many ways we're quite separate from any thought that this is going to happen. There's really, you open a door, you go into another room in your house. I don't think any of us expect we're going to walk in and see an angel or see, anything divine. We're just not accustomed to thinking in these terms. We're not accustomed to listening, to watching for the divine presence in our lives in a literal way, in a way that enters through our senses. But earlier generations were, and they were aware of the possibility of doing it wrong, and of paying a price for it. All right, we'll jump back into the text here. So this is verse 14. He shall take some of the blood of the bull and sprinkle it with his finger over the cover of the east side, and in front of the cover he shall sprinkle some of the blood with his finger 7 times. He shall then slaughter the people's goat of purification offering, bring its blood behind the curtain, and do with its blood as he has done with the blood of the bull. He shall sprinkle it over the cover and in front of the cover. Thus he shall purge the shrine of the impurity and transgressions of the Israelites, whatever their sins. And he shall do the same for the tent of meeting, which abides with them in the midst of their impurity. When he goes in to make expiation in the shrine, nobody else shall be in the tent of meeting until he comes out. When he's made expiation for himself and for his household and for the whole congregation of Israel, he shall go out to the altar that is before the Lord and purge it. He shall take some of the blood of the bull and of the goat and apply it to each of the horns of the altar. The rest of the blood he shall sprinkle on it with his finger 7 times. Thus he shall purify it of the impurity of the Israelites and consecrate it. So just a couple of things to note here. So the text is fairly clear, but a little unclear about the number of bulls that are offered here, because we had sort of a reference to a bull, and then we lost that thread, and then we came back to it, and then we see here that he makes expiation. I'm on verse 17. For himself and his household and for the whole congregation of Israel. So are those 3 expiations 3 sacrifices? Are those 3 animal offerings? Or is you can read it to say the bull there's one bull that's for him and for his family, and then the goat for the congregation. Or you can read it to say it's one bull for him, one bull for his family, and then the goat for the congregation. And that is the reading that predominates. If you remember the Avodah service on Yom Kippur, we sort of go into the details. We fill in the gaps. It's this text is sort of the basis of the conversation, but it gets expanded upon. And one of the ways it's expanded upon is to say that those are two separate things: the expiation for himself and the expiation for his family, and he has to do both of those before he can purify Israel, before he can be a leader standing up on behalf of the Jewish people. First, he has to clean his own slate. First, to borrow the airplane metaphor, first he has to put on his own oxygen mask before he can put on anyone else's. And it is an interesting notice on leadership, on what it is to be a leader, either a Jewish leader or other types of leaders, where first you have to take care of yourself. First, you have to be in a position of being able to stand as leader and not be overwhelmed and burdened by your own personal issues. And so we see that, and not only personal issues but family also. Aaron, the high priest, has to make expiation for his family, and then he can purge the altar. Then he can stand before God and ask for forgiveness for the Jewish people. So we see here on verse 19, thus he shall purify it of the impurities of the Israelites and consecrate it. So in the Hebrew, you take a look here. The order is a little different, but the verbs are the same. V'tiharo v'kidsho mitumot b'nei Israel. So he purifies it and sanctifies it from the impurities of the children of Israel. And it's a little bit unclear from a modern perspective of just what is happening here. Is this purification and consecration? Is this the goal? Is this what we've been working toward? This is what we've aimed to accomplish? Or is this preparation for the real goal? Is this preparation for what comes next? You clean something so that it's clean, but then ultimately you clean it so that you can use it. You wipe down the table so that you can put dinner on. And it's an interesting question. I mean, obviously, I think we would say, all things being equal, we want to be purified and consecrated. We want to have that sort of relationship with God, whether it's instrumental or not. But if it's leading to something, that's good too. Now, this becomes sort of where the rubber meets the road here is the fact that the biblical understanding, or what we assume is the biblical understanding of Yom Kippur, is substantially different from how today's modern Yom Kippur tends to be understood and tends to be practiced. You can read this here, a lot of scholars do, I think correctly, that what's happening here is preparation for Sukkot. That this is about doing a little bit of physical and spiritual cleaning to prepare the Jewish people, to prepare the temple in Jerusalem for the pilgrimage holiday of Sukkot. And that Sukkot is in many ways the grand occasion. And so this is just, this is holy and meaningful and powerful, but it is preparatory. It is preparatory for the main event. Now, that's definitely not how most people understand what they're doing on Yom Kippur. That's definitely not the attitude we bring to Yom Kippur. And as a rabbi, I can look around the room and I can tell you that probably the majority of the people who show up on Yom Kippur, I'm not speaking but specifically of our synagogue, but in general, over my many years of working in many different synagogues, the majority of people who show up on Yom Kippur aren't showing up on Sukkot. They're not thinking about this as preparation for something else. They're not thinking about it as purification for the main event. That is quite the opposite, actually. Yom Kippur is the main event. That is the big holiday in most people's understanding of things. I think it's a very powerful message. I think it's a very powerful metaphor. It's still relevant even today. You say, okay, so you've been cleaned and consecrated and purified and forgiven of all of your past transgressions, and now you are a pure, sacred vessel. For what? For yourself? Or are you going to be a pure, sacred vessel for the joyful worship of God and the joyful connection that we experience on Sukkot, which is a profoundly beautiful and happy holiday. And I find so often I have a hard time connecting sometimes. I have a hard time really getting into the mental space of people who just come for Yom Kippur, because frankly, it's not my favorite holiday. It's a real bummer. It doesn't do it for me. It doesn't lift me up. I mean, I do my best, but it's not. If I could only choose one holiday, it would 100% be Sukkot. I would always skip Yom Kippur and go to Sukkot if I could only do one. And it is the people who are making the opposite choice, I struggle to understand what's their motive, what's their drive. I think you'd have to ask them, I suppose, but I feel like there's a lot of missed opportunities there.
Yeah, I agree. I think Sukkot is very underappreciated, I guess, in the American experience. I don't know about other communities around the world, but I had never understood it, though, to be the culmination of Yom Kippur, the culmination of events. And that is really very, very interesting.
There is some, even like, I mean, this is ancient stuff here, looking at the Torah, obviously. This goes way back, but, there's more recent material that points in that direction. Also, there's some Hasidic understandings that the tshuva that happens on Yom Kippur, we use the metaphor of God putting people in the book of life or not. And so the idea among some Hasidim is that God puts you in the book of life on Yom Kippur based on your repentance, based on your ability to do tshuva and to merit having another year of life. But there are some people who are still in the maybe category, and God puts them in the book of life on Sukkot. God puts them specifically on Hoshana Rabbah. God puts them in the book of life, not based on tshuva, but based on simcha, based on how much they are enjoying life and enjoying the holiday of Sukkot, which we call Zman Simchatenu, the time of our rejoicing. So there is a spiritual connection between the two holidays, which has been noted. Oh, please go ahead.
The fact that you bring in guests, and you bring guests in a tenuous structure that allows you all to feel both exposed and supported by each other, is very powerful also. As a source of entering that from maybe to positive column,
right. Oh, it's
personal is what I'm getting.
It's a very lived sort of holiday. You're right. It's all about friends and family, and it's very tactile. You're building a thing, and you're waving the lulav and the etrog, and it's all in many ways it feels like a sort of amplified version of regular life. It's not profoundly different from the way we live the rest of our days. It's just a little more intense. And it can be, it's not so different, honestly, from what I was saying earlier about how priests have to be married. The Kohen Gadol has to be married. That this is about the joy and the holiness of a connected life, the joy and the holiness of a life that is lived with community, with friends and family. And it's it's a very not every tradition thinks that that's the holiest way to do things. Some people say you need to wander off and hang out on a mountaintop for a while.
Right.
For us, it's very different. We love the connection that happens between human beings, and we see God in that, and we see God in in our relationship with our family, with our flowing back through the generations, and that's how we connect to this tradition. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
All right, so let's see. We'll keep going here because we're getting close to finishing a fun little bit here. So when he has finished purging the shrine, the tent of meeting, and the altar, the live goat shall be brought forward, and Aaron shall lay both his hands upon the head of the live goat and confess over it all the iniquities and transgressions of the Israelites, whatever their sins, putting them on the head of the goat, and it shall be sent off to the wilderness through a designated man. Thus the goat shall carry on it all their iniquities to an inaccessible region, and the goat shall be set free in the wilderness. So this is the goat of Azazel, and Aaron puts his hands on it and confesses all of Israel's sins, and then they send it off into the wilderness. There's one guy whose job it is to walk with the goat and take it off to the wilderness. Now, probably if you're a little bit familiar with these texts, you filled in the gaps in your mind, and you know that the goat doesn't have a good day. The goat is taken to the wilderness, where he's taken to a cliff in the desert and thrown off the cliff to his demise. But it doesn't say that in the text here. That is not a part of the text itself. In the text itself, it's simply that the goat is sent off. The goat goes out into the wilderness to live its life, to, carry with it the sins of Israel. It was later that a tradition established. Now, I don't know if this was based on something that actually happened. Maybe. I wouldn't be surprised. But there was some concern about what happens if this goat comes back. What happens if this goat follows the guy back, or maybe gets caught up in a herd of other sheep and goats, and some shepherd, he's wandering through the desert and he says, "Oh, free goat, great, add it to my pile." And so to keep that from happening, they began throwing it off the cliff to make sure that it wouldn't come back. But the text doesn't say anything about that. The text simply says that you let the goat go. You let the goat escape into the wilderness, which is, of course, the origin of the English term scapegoat. This is where that concept was brought into the English language. When I think it was Wycliffe, right, who translated and needed a word to describe this goat, and just invented the word scapegoat. No one had ever used it before he did. All right, and Aaron shall go into the tent of meeting, take off the linen vestments that he put on when he entered the shrine, and leave them there. He shall bathe his body in water in the holy precinct and put on his vestments. Then he shall come out and offer his burnt offering and the burnt offering of the people, making expiation for himself and for the people. The fat of the purification offering he shall turn into smoke on the altar. So Aaron changes his clothes, presumably the clothes he uses to step into the Holy of Holies shouldn't get blood on them, shouldn't get all the sacrificial stuff on them. So he switches into his regular clothes, which we saw previously described in was it Parashat Shmini. He who set the Azazel goat free shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water. After that, he may re-enter the camp. The bull of purification offering and the goat of purification offering, whose blood was brought in to purge the shrine, shall be taken outside the camp. Their hides, flesh, and dung shall be consumed in fire. He who burned them shall wash his clothes, bathe his body in water, and after that he may re-enter the camp. So we see here that we're sort of wrapping up the ritual. Like, we've done the thing, we've sacrificed the animals, we're burning the remains of the animals, we've taken the goat out to the wilderness, and now the question is, how do you wrap it up? You gotta wash yourself, you gotta wash your change your clothes, wash your body, do a sort of ritual purification so that you exit out of this holiest of holy times and re-enter into the regular life. And then it says, and this shall be a law to you for all time. In the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you shall practice self-denial, and you shall do no manner of work, neither the citizen nor the alien who resides among you. So finally, we've gotten to the day, right? Finally, we're getting to Yom Kippur, that we know, the 10th day of the 7th month, and of self-denial.